Okay, so and Grady, I'll let you introduce yourself in a second, but um yeah, this is Grady at Grady Hillhouse. Some of you, well, these are Pete's students, so I haven't checked in with them. I know a lot of my students were pretty excited because they have been watching your channel for years. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, no intro needed, says Jose. So they might be pretty familiar with your channel already and pretty excited to hear from you. So if you could maybe just tell us a little bit about you and then we'll get into it.
Excuse me. Yeah. So my name's Grady Hillhouse. I am a licensed professional engineer in Texas, although I'm not doing a lot of engineering these days. Mostly right now, my career is kind of focused on communicating about civil engineering and infrastructure to kind of the broader audience. And we'll get into a little bit more about that. But yeah, thanks for having me. And just jump in if something with the technology goes wrong. Otherwise, I'll just get started. Um, I wanted to say this first because I think it kind of frames the whole discussion. Communication is one of those things that everyone thinks they're automatically good at, right? It's like reading and walking and going to the bathroom, stuff that's tough when you're a kid, but now it's such a fundamental part of what you do every day. You assume that it's something you've already mastered. But I could tell you after many years in a corporate office that it's not necessarily true. And I'm sure, most of you have probably experienced the same thing that good communication is hard to come by, and great communication is even more rare. And it's something I think is really important to share because your ability to communicate your ideas and your opinions and your work products is so crucial to the trajectory of your career. In many ways, your communication defines the quality of your work, right? How good of an engineer you are. And many, if not most, of the problems and challenges that come up in our professional lives have a root cause in poor communication, right? Projects going over budget, missing deadlines, even lawsuits. You think that stuff happens because of math errors or miscalculations or bad designs. But in most cases, when you get to the heart of it, a lot of them are really just because someone didn't communicate well, didn't communicate enough, didn't communicate clearly. So yeah, the stakes are high if you think about it. Um, I worked for nearly 10 years in a private consulting firm, and first in Austin, then in San Antonio. Worked on a lot of really cool projects, a few really big jobs, and just overall had a really exciting stint as a professional engineer. And there are so many lessons you learn once you get your degree and head off into a real career. But um, for me, at least, the importance of communication and the central role that it plays in the workplace was one of the biggest ones for me. Um, and also, as some of you probably know, during that time in my spare hours after work and on weekends, I started making videos about engineering and posting them to YouTube to share kind of my passion and interest with this career under the name Practical Engineering, if you're not familiar with the channel. And that's been, a very wild ride. Some of the videos I've made have been terrible, right? I have no formal training in video production. I'm a novice at this. Um, my video about a HEC-RAS model on Mars, although one of my personal favorites, wasn't my biggest hit. No offense to you water resource engineers out there. And then some of the videos have gone completely viral with millions of views shared around the world, which has been a lot of fun. Um, this is one of my favorite headlines. Friendly engineer explains how terrifying sinkholes form. Um, when the channel got 100,000 subscribers, YouTube sent me this plaque, which was cool. And then when I got 1 million subscribers, they sent me another one, and I have those hanging up in my office as proof of just how big a nerd I am. And now the channel has more than 3 million subscribers. Every month, somewhere north of 5 million people watch my big goofy face talk about some aspect of civil engineering. And the only reason I share that statistic is that I've learned so much more about engineering communication through the production of these videos and the interactions with the audience there than I ever did in higher education or even on the job in a professional setting. And running this channel and all the things that go into that is now what I do full time. So communication in some ways is how I feed my family. So I just thought it'd be kind of fun to try and boil some of those lessons down for you and share them in the hopes that maybe some of them will be helpful to you. So, in the spirit of YouTube video titles, this is my top 9 list. You might be wondering why not 10? Well, you have to keep watching to the end to find out. The first one, I'll show the problem. Engineers, we love to talk about solutions, right? But we're just not always great about explaining the problem the solution is intended to solve. And I think a lot of us tend to think of problems as weaknesses, but it's not really true. And if you can do this and do it right, it's a really powerful tool in communication. And the first reason is that it humanizes you. And I can give you a perfect example of that. A couple of years ago, I got invited to be part of a TEDx event there on the A&M campus. And, I really prefer to be in front of a camera. I'm not really much of a public speaker, but it sounded fun, so I agreed. I wrote a talk, worked super hard practicing it day after day after day. Felt like I had it perfect. Showed up on the day of the rehearsal and went through the whole thing on the stage, and it went flawlessly. So I was feeling pretty good, at least. Um, so the next day, when it came time to actually give the talk to the audience, I made it a little ways into it and my microphone broke. So I had to come off stage, get a new microphone and start all the way over. And I was already super nervous about this. So that whole experience got me so flustered that I ended up forgetting a big part of my talk and just completely skipping it. And this is all online, by the way. You can go watch it on YouTube if you want. They edited it together pretty well, but you could tell I'm not having a lot of fun down there. Um, and I tell you the story right at the beginning because now every mistake I make in this talk, you're going to be much more likely to forgive me, right? I'm just like most of you. I don't like public speaking very much. I've embarrassed myself in front of a large audience. Just because your professor invited me to talk with you doesn't make me special, right? Commiseration is a powerful thing, and people often don't want just the good news, right? They want to know that you're a human too, that you're relatable, and they want to understand the challenges that you're facing to be able to really appreciate the solution. People love to solve a problem. So, not necessarily focusing your communication on the problem, but at least taking the time to frame it clearly is a way to get people engaged in the solution. And if the goal of whatever you're communicating is to get help, to get collaboration, or just convince others to do anything, a call to action, that's a big reason for a lot of our communication. Talking about the problem is the best way to do it. And the last thing it does is that it makes the solution self-evident. And I have an example of that too. I did a video a while back about structural foundations, and there's 100 ways you could do this. It could have been called the different kinds of foundation systems, and we could have listed off footings and rafts and basements and crawl spaces and piles and all that. But instead, the script really focuses on the challenges of putting any structure on the ground. And it talks about the bearing strength of soils and differential movement and vertical loads and horizontal loads and rot and termite freezing. And the trick is that once you start to internalize all these problems, the different solutions start to show themselves, right? For example, once you start to understand the challenges of founding a building below the frost line, it starts to make perfect sense why all the buildings in the north have basements and those in the south don't. And once you understand bearing strength, it makes sense why some structures need deep foundation systems like piles. It's kind of a subtle reframing of the information, and it might seem natural to you, but if you put the problem first and then talk about the solution, it just makes the information more engaging and thought provoking. One of the most powerful things you could do as a communicator is answer a question as soon as it pops into the head of your audience. And that makes them feel smart and connected to what you're saying. And that's just so easy to accomplish when you kind of frame the problem first. So that's the first big lesson that I've learned. Number 2, I call use case studies. This is so simple. People love stories, right? Narrative structure is as old as human history. A plot is an extremely powerful way to share information. And yet, right, what are our points of reference for professional communication? College lectures, government reports, emails, phone calls. That's the type of stuff we interact with. But what was the last piece of media that you couldn't put down or couldn't stop watching? It was some kind of story. And you can't invent fictional stories to get your ideas across, but you can use real stories of projects you've worked on or read about. And this is kind of a secret cheat code to engagement, and I don't think you see it enough in education or professional communication. Specifically, like failures and things where something goes wrong. Um, People learn from that, and it's a lot. It's just more interesting and more fun to listen to. Nearly every practical engineering video, if it isn't a story kind of in and of itself, at least starts with a case study. It's basically a way of answering the question of why should I care? Why should I care about the way groundwater moves around structures? Oh, this construction worker fell into a sinkhole when the caisson blew out, and now I want to understand why, so I don't actually accidentally fall into a sinkhole. Um, why should I care about the problems that large industrial pumps face? Oh, my city sits below sea level, and we need these big pump stations to deal with drainage. Um, you can do this too. I know most of you don't have a lot of professional experience, but um, ASCE and other professional organizations' websites are full of conference proceedings where engineers and owners have shared the stories of their projects, and a lot of them are really interesting. So that's a super valuable resource because you can use those stories and get people engaged and interested in the information you have to share. Number three, I call draw a picture. Um, some of you might know this. I wrote a book that came out recently. It's called Engineering in Plain Sight. And, if you just look at it, it looks kind of like a kid's book, right? It's full of illustrations that are kind of childlike. It's not a kid's book, not really. Not that it's not for kids, but it's written to a little bit older audience. Uh, so the writing is definitely above the heads of most young kids, but the visual style of it was deliberate because to make civil engineering exciting to a general audience, you don't just hand over a college lecture, right? You have to go kind of beyond that. Most adult books aren't as colorful and full of pictures as children's books. And the reason for that isn't because we don't like pictures as adults, right? It's because illustration is hard work. Um, Children's books are colorful because kids wouldn't read them otherwise. And on the other hand, many of the things that we want to communicate as adults can be said in words alone, but that absolutely doesn't mean that they always should be. Um, and this is probably not a revelation to anyone, right? We all know that good visuals go a long way. A picture is worth 1,000 words. And yet, when we get taught about communications, we always focus on what? Writing and speaking. But there's this critical third leg to that stool, I think, which is visual communication. So this is just me trying to empower you to get in touch with your artistic side. Spend a little time in Photoshop or Illustrator or with a tech pen and a piece of paper. Take a class, just invest in your ability to express ideas visually because it really can take you a long way. This this I think is a particularly neglected skill in engineering. And alternatively, this is me empowering you to pay professionals to do this for you, um, because it's not always possible uh, in a professional setting to do it yourself. So if a report or a presentation or a video or anything like that needs graphics or visual help, making that investment really can help you stand out. We use motion graphics in nearly every practical engineering video to convey complicated ideas because there's no other way to do it, right? And I used to do these myself. Now someone else does them for me. And the other thing we do is build physical models, right? This is a demo of a sewage pumping station. This is a model I built to show how cathodic protection against rust works. It's probably a little less relevant to you, but it's still kind of a similar process of creating a visual that conveys information better than words can. And the point is that we invest in that process because of how important it is. The next one is packaging first. people kind of think there's one big hurdle with communication, which is keeping the audience engaged in what you're trying to communicate. But really, there's two big hurdles, at least the way I think of it. Keeping people engaged is the second one, but the first one is just getting people to show up in the first place, right? Getting them to take that first step of opening your email or showing up to a presentation or clicking on that video, right? Um, it's kind of part of that attention economy philosophy. You're always competing for the attention of people. If you've ever been to a conference and a block comes up and you look at your program and you're just like blah, none of this sounds very interesting. Um, all those talks that you have the chance to go to might be full of fascinating details where you would learn a lot, but it just doesn't matter if you can't make it sound worth attending. If you can't get people over that first hurdle, it doesn't even matter about the second one. And the way that translates on YouTube is that I don't write and produce a video until I know what the packaging looks like, right? The title and the thumbnail of the video. And it seems kind of subtle at first, but what this does is it forces you to recontextualize your topic and figure out what's the most interesting part of it first. A few examples. I did a video about electrical grounding and bonding. And while I'm researching this topic, I'm always thinking, where's that biggest curiosity gap, right? You can ask people, what's your biggest question about electrical grounding and bonding, but you're never going to get a great answer because people don't know what they don't know. But after some time reading and thinking about this, I kind of stumbled upon this question of where does grounded electricity actually go? And that's not a question that an engineering lecture is going to address directly, right? But for a lay audience, it's kind of at the heart of what makes this topic kind of difficult to wrap your head around. And it's one of those questions that you would never even think to ask, right? But once you see it posed, you just have to know the answer. Another one is I wanted to do a video about this construction process called horizontal directional drilling. And there's so many parts of this that you can cover. And I did cover a lot of them in the video, but for the packaging, you have to think what's the most interesting part of this, right? What's going to get people across that first hurdle? And what I came up with, and I think we nailed it on this one, is how do you steer that bit below the surface? That's the big question that people want to know. And the trick about going through this process first is that the packaging can drive the rest of the process, right? There's always going to be a difference between what you care about and what you want your audience to know versus what they think they care about. So if you can separate yourself from your audience and kind of identify what it is they care about, you just stand the chance of getting more people over that first hurdle. Um, and I mean, again, this is probably not something new to you. We all know that we need hooks in communication, right? But if you find a good hook after you wrote your talk or your email or whatever you're trying to communicate, and it doesn't and what you communicate doesn't deliver on that hook, it's clickbait, right? People feel tricked. They feel fooled. And so if you create the packaging first, you have the opportunity to deliver on that promise that the packaging makes. Whereas if you do it last, you're kind of stuck with what you have. One more example of that, I just pulled 3 videos about land subsidence, and those 2 videos on the left have a few thousand views. They have subsidence in the title. You know exactly what you're getting when you click on a video like that. And they have a few thousand views each. And then you look at this one on the right that Vox put together. That's called Why Jakarta Sinking, and it's just this subtle reframing. Um, the technical information in all 3 of these videos is pretty similar, but you can see when you use the packaging to make it relevant and engaging, people respond to that. And it's hard work to do that, by the way. Some of the messages that we have to share with the world just aren't that fascinating. It takes time and effort to think about what's interesting and what's not, how to help an audience make a connection to information that may be dry and mundane otherwise. But it's a good trick to think about how you're going to package things first before you dive into preparing the rest of whatever your communication might be. Number five, borrow. Actually, this is something that I learned as a consultant first, which is that you never start from scratch, right? Whatever you're doing, whether it's a report, a design, a drawing, you go back and you pull examples of where it's been done before. Most of the best stuff in the world is derivative in some way, right? Nothing is truly original. People learn to play guitar by playing their favorite guitar player's songs. People learn to draw by drawing their favorite cartoon characters, right? If any of you are writers, you might have heard this term reading for craft. And the idea is that the best works of writing or film or video or podcasts or audiobooks or whatever, you just get swept up in them, right? You don't pay attention to the details of how they were put together. But the idea of reading for craft is you kind of take a step back and look at the structure, right? Look at at what information is shared at the beginning versus the end. How does the author signpost? How long before they move on to the next scene or whatever? All those little details are conscious decisions, and if you just kind of take a step back, you can notice them and kind of use those to learn yourself. Communication is not a black box, right? It's out there for anyone to have a look, to scrutinize, to learn from, and borrow. I'm not saying plagiarize, just so that's clear. But I am giving you permission to pay attention to the methods and the strategies and the tricks that work well for others and kind of metaphorically stand on the shoulders of the people that you like to kind of elevate your own communication. Six is create a feedback loop. This is another thing I learned as a consultant. Those two words might give some of you some heartache. Um, but if you've done internships or you've worked in any kind of professional capacity, you probably remember the first big task you did, right? You worked hard on a memo or a report or a calculation, and you send it to a senior engineer, and you just get back this sea of red, right? Um, and the truth is, it's true even for very senior engineers, and for one reason, and that's if you did the work, you're too close to it to see all its flaws. So really, the only way that you get better is to receive unbiased feedback. And that's what quality control really is. So, in all things in life, but in communication too, you really have to find a way to get that type of feedback. And I'm really lucky on YouTube actually, because we get over 5,000 comments a month. And also, my email is publicly available. So I get a ton of emails too. And I try to read them all, right? Because they're really helpful. We get a lot of different stuff, compliments and praise, helps with motivation. Mean stuff, you can't help but get some of that, and you try to let it roll off your back. But even some of that is constructive. We get ideas for topics of videos, production tips, right? I'm a novice at this, like I mentioned. So I get emails from people who are like, your lighting's bad or your sound's bad. Here's how you can fix it. And I also get a lot of comments and emails from experts in the topics that I talk about. And, those people help me learn and help me get better as a writer. So this feedback is just such an extremely valuable resource. And it's hard to come by, right? Companies pay big bucks for focus groups and surveys. It's just not that easy to get people to tell you what they think. So whether it's leaning on coworkers or friends and family or posting stuff online to strangers, you just got to find a way to open yourself up to feedback because it really is a big part of how you get better. Seven, I call drop the act. This is kind of a story. My wife is in education and she was a kindergarten teacher when I first started working as a civil engineer. Ignore the mustache in that picture. So I got invited to her elementary school to give a presentation about civil engineering, right? And what do you do when you have to give a talk to your career about young students? You talk about fatigue cracks and factors of safety and that kind of stuff. No, right? You try to make it relatable. Um, I was a dam engineer. I've been called worse, but that's what my employer called me. So I built a model that shows the different purposes of a dam and reservoir. And if you've done these before, you kind of know the way these career days work. One or two grade levels come to your room, sit down, you give this presentation for 10 minutes or so, answer a few questions, and then more classes come in. So you end up giving this talk maybe 5 or 6 times all right in a row. And the first one I did, went really well, right? It seemed like the kids were interested in what I had to say, but I noticed I was getting a lot of questions from teachers. Um, so the next few classes, I started paying attention to the teachers and the administrators in the back as I went through my presentation. And I was really surprised at not just how attentive they were, but also how many of the questions, like genuine questions, not just for the sake of their students, that they were asking. Um, the number one small talk question that you get as an adult is, what do you do for a living? And, we all try to do our best to answer that question. But I know I had never talked about civil engineering to any adult and had them look at me the way that these adults did when I was talking to their elementary school students. And it slowly kind of dawned on me over the course of these 5 or 6 presentations I gave that engineering doesn't have to be boring to non-engineers, right? I don't know if you feel this way, but over time, I had kind of grown to believe that this stuff is only cool to me, right? And the people who think like I do. But engineering affects everyone. It's relevant to everyone, and it can be interesting to everyone too. It was boring when I talked about it to other people because I was usually trying to make myself sound smart and dignified, to avoid dumbing it down or accidentally patronizing someone. But it happened so quickly in engineering that you forget how much context and background and education that it takes to be competent at the job. And most people don't have that stuff. Um, we've all sat through a presentation or even had a conversation with someone where they assume that you knew or understood something that you didn't. And is that fun? Is it interesting? No. When you're forced to listen to someone discuss a topic with which you have no connection, no background, you just turn off your brain, right? You don't have enough access to be excited or enthusiastic. So when we try to dignify our message by using jargon, by being careful not to patronize, um, sometimes we do it at the expense of really connecting with an audience, big or small, and giving them an opportunity to understand and appreciate our message. So this career day kind of taught me to drop the engineer act, basically to not be afraid to share my experiences and knowledge like I would to a group of kids. Half of civil engineers just sit around thinking about dirt and rock all day, right? We have no good reason to pretend to be so dignified. So just don't be afraid to be a little silly, a little casual in your communication. It's not just how you keep the interest of a bunch of kindergartners for 15 minutes, right? It's how you reach an audience on their level. Um, and the next one is kind of tied to that as well. And it's taken me a long time to get out of this habit, and I still fall into it from time to time, which is that in the same way that we use fancy words and jargon and technical speak as a way to project our confidence, engineers have kind of a tendency to use a stoicism to project confidence, right? It's that classic airplane pilot over the intercom voice. You can go back to some of my older videos on the channel and see this. I'm not just talking about topics that aren't really traditionally exciting, but I'm also talking about them in a way that isn't very exciting either, even though I usually am excited about them. I'm talking to a general audience in the same way I would talk to a coworker or another engineer. And if you watch yourself on camera giving a presentation or something like that, you're probably going to see the same thing. It's just, it's often hard for engineers to convey excitement and enthusiasm, even if that's the way you feel about the topic. And the problem with that is if you look and sound bored, your audience is going to feel bored too. And that's okay for an airline pilot. It's good if people are bored on an airplane, but a lot of the information we want to share, we want it to have the opposite effect. So I had kind of started to recognize that in my videos. And around that time, I decided I wanted to make this 2-part series about pumps and a few of the things that I thought were interesting about them. But yeah, it's pumps, right? And I knew that for a general audience, maybe it's a bit of a stretch in terms of making the topic engaging. So in the intro to the second video, there's this one part of the script where I just say, I love pumps, which is true for me. And it might be true for you too, but it's not something you just traditionally blurt out. But people love that. We got a ton of comments about that line. And I think it just came down to the fact that yes, this is a topic that most people wouldn't get that excited about. But me saying I love pumps gives you permission to be excited about them too. Um, we think about charisma is something you either have or you don't have. And trust me, I'm not really the one to be giving tips on charisma, but I know there are things in your work or your studies that you're excited and passionate about. And I also know that you'll occasionally, or maybe all the time, have to be in meetings or give presentations to clients or people outside your immediate sphere of coworkers. So I'm just encouraging you to make a conscious effort to show some enthusiasm in those situations, not just in how you present the information, but in the actual words you use, right? It's okay to tell someone you love pumps or whatever it is. Your audience is going to look to you to decide how to think and feel about the information you're sharing. So if you're happy, if you're excited and enthusiastic, the better chances are that they will be too. Number 9 is include a payoff. I said at the beginning that you'd have to wait and see why there's only 9 things on the list. And whether you realize that or not, that tiny little thing I said has probably kept you paying just a little more attention to everything else I said up to this point. We get taught a lot to signpost communication, say what you're going to say, then say the thing, then say what you said as a conclusion. The problem with that is that it's boring, right? Maybe people learn through repetition, but they don't pay attention to it. This is the reason that content formatted as a list is so popular, right? It's hard to resist sticking around to hear the next thing. There are a million different ways you can put information in order. So this is just me saying, be thoughtful about what you share at the beginning versus the end. Signpost with some intrigue, and then reward your audience for sticking with you. I call it the payoff. You call it whatever you want. We do this all the time on the channel. And I just consider it being a good steward of the attention that your audience gives you and rewarding them for sticking around. So here's your payoff. There's actually a 10th thing on my list. And this last one is really just to kind of summarize the philosophy of communication and engineering. One of the tenets of the ASCE Code of Ethics is to educate the public on the role of civil engineering. We're actually obligated to help people understand what we do. And there's probably a lot of good reasons they put this in there, but being kind of at the intersection of public communication on engineering, I feel like I have a little bit of a handle on this. I don't have to tell you that a lot of what we do, if we don't do a good job, has consequences to public safety, right? And that's fine. There are a lot of professions that deal with public safety, emergency managers, firefighters, law enforcement, medical professions. But if I'm a member of the general public, I can see a firefighter spraying water on a building. But I can't check the math of the civil engineer who designed this bridge that I drive over every day, right? So the fact that what we do is often not only complex and complicated, but also out of the public eye, it puts a lot of responsibility on our shoulders. And I really think that's why ASCE obligates us to make sure that we're endeavoring to help the public understand what it is we do. You probably heard of the infrastructure report card. They put it out every 4 years. It's a comprehensive look at infrastructure, identifying needs for funding and action, and they give each category a grade from A to F, like it was taking a college course. And I think it's a really good tool for communicating the state of our infrastructure. And it works, right? Just about every news article that you read about infrastructure in America will reference the infrastructure report card. But I don't think it really gets people to care, right? It's kind of a shortcut to critical thinking. It gets the point across. It's an easy soundbite, but it doesn't necessarily encourage the average person to consider the infrastructure around them. And I guess the point I'm making is that this communication tool doesn't really satisfy that need to help people understand the built environment and how it works. We don't need ASE to tell us what to think about infrastructure. We don't need a report card. People need to understand how a water tower works, or where stormwater goes, or why road construction takes so long, right? They need help making a connection between themselves and their constructed environment, and the ability to form their own conclusions and opinions about its condition and needs. They need to see and meet people like you who care about finding innovative ways to meet our basic needs. I really believe this, and it's important to me, and it drives what I do every day. And so I just hope that some of these lessons that I've learned over my career might be helpful to you, and might encourage you to take any opportunities you have to improve your communication skills, and more importantly, to be just an advocate for civil engineering to the world. Um, Thank you so much for having me and for your time, and I'd be happy to answer anyone's questions.
Thanks, Grady. And for questions, you guys can just unmute and shout it out. You're welcome to use the chat as well, either one.
When did you realize you wanted to help educate like the general public on some of these engineering principles?
Um, I think it was kind of a long evolution. I mean, so I got my bachelor's degree actually is in geography, and I came to A&M in 2009, I think, as a master's student in civil engineering. And so my first engineering classes were just, I mean, it was just a complete transformation of perspective for me. It just like every class was like turning on a lamp to illuminate some part of the built world that I had never even noticed before. And for whatever reason, right, I just never stopped feeling like that. And I just pay attention to everything around me, and I've just always kind of felt compelled and excited about that in a way that makes me want to share it with other people. Um, but it was a longer process, to YouTube. My channel started out as a woodworking channel because I got some woodworking tools and, just kind of wanted to be a part of that community. And slowly kind of started talking about civil engineering on the channel to the point where that became the bigger focus.
Do you think doing engineering education has been more rewarding for you than doing engineering design?
That's a tough question to answer. I mean, I do miss a lot of parts of like being an actual engineer and working on those really cool projects. Um, that was a lot of fun and really rewarding in itself. I think probably just with the size of audience that the channel has gained somehow, that it's more impactful. But for me personally, I don't know if it's more rewarding. I really enjoyed both, and I wish I had enough time to do it all, but I just don't. So
Thank you.
Do you have a favorite video topic that you've had to research for your channel?
um that's tough. I worked on dams most of my career, and so I really do like talking about dams. People, they're cool structures. People are interested in the engineering behind them. So I like doing those. Um, the ones that I get a lot out of, I've covered a lot of different topics on the power grid and bulk power supply and stuff like that. And those are things that are further outside my area of expertise. So it's been a lot of fun kind of um, going really deep in that and really, having to talk to people and learn those topics and stuff like that. So um, I guess there's two parts of it. Some of them, like I really learned a lot personally, and some of them are just like a lot of fun for me to do to share the things that I learned throughout my career. If you
Anybody?
have
Yes. There we
if you
go.
have a question and you don't want to say it out loud, feel free to put it in the chat too.
If I can maybe keep the ball rolling here, Grady, why don't you tell us
Sure.
a little bit about the transition from engineer to YouTuber and why you made that choice?
I mean, yeah, it really is. It was a combination of a lot of things. Like I said, the channel started as a hobby, and it was a hobby for a long time. Um, but we had a baby, COVID happened, and just all these different factors kind of combined to the point where I just had no more free time left. And so I basically was going to have to choose something to give up, and ultimately decided, if the YouTube thing crashes into the ground, I can always go back and be an engineer. So might as well give it a shot. And so I think that was uh in early 2021. Yeah. So I've been doing this just about 3 years now, full time. Oh, the book contract was the other big one. So the book contract, the baby, and COVID really kind of just all came full force at me.
I've seen a lot of videos on your channel actually, and you have a lot of scale models that are really cool for showing effects. Do you just make those in your garage?
Yeah. So that so we put out 2 videos a month, and I try to have the first one include some kind of scale model. So I mean, it's kind of always been part of the channel to build something. I just like working on stuff in the garage, and those it's always an interesting challenge to kind of illustrate some topic in engineering at a small scale. And people just like them, it's fun to see little demonstrations like that. So yeah, I just go out in the garage and build stuff.
I know like continuing education into your career is like a big thing for engineers. And I just wanted your input on like maybe the best methods that you encountered on learning new topics or maybe deepening your knowledge into a certain field of engineering. Just like your favorite methods.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I still have to do it, even though I'm not practicing as an engineer. To keep my license, I have to do that stuff. So um, there's a lot of things that I use. Going to a conference there's so many different professional organizations, and going to their annual conference or whatever, you kind of get not only do you get the networking out of it, but you get to see a lot of really interesting topics, and chat with people about the projects they've worked on or the papers they've written or whatever. So that can be a really good one. And there's just so many good ones, like even for damn specific engineers, there were 2 professional organizations with annual conferences that we could go to. So that's a good one. And then also those professional organizations a lot of times have webinars or on-demand training on their websites if you're a member. And so you kind of get this full library of courses. And some of them are better than others, but it is pretty nice to like, just spend an hour hearing from someone who focuses on that very specific thing as a part of their career. And you get the slides as handouts, and you have those as reference whenever a lot of times in your professional career, you don't know what's coming next. And so you kind of have to have all these different tools and expertise that you can call on when you need it. And so that can be a really nice tool too. Those are the 2 big ones that I kind of rely on for those professional development credits.
Anyone else?
Speak now.
My dog looked at me when I said that, so I have a question, but
Do you have any like video topics that you're interested in? You're doing research and then you just don't have enough feet for a video?
It hasn't happened to me yet. Usually a lot of times I'm having to cut down a topic into like a series or multiple videos. I rarely get to that point where it's like where you're deep in the research and you can't find enough to talk about. The bigger challenge is how can I frame this to make it interesting to people who already don't care about the topic, basically. Because there's so much in engineering that's fascinating if you can find a way to frame it that makes it relevant to people beyond just other engineers. So that really is the bigger challenge. And there are a lot of topics that are on my list of things that I think are fascinating, but I just haven't found a way to kind of frame it in a way that makes it interesting to a large audience.
what's kind of a way, or like your thought process or method that you go into when you're trying to frame something, just make it interesting?
It's really just a lot of brainstorming. I mean, if it's something I don't know about, I'll do a lot of initial research first to make sure I feel like I have kind of my head around the topic. But a lot of times it's just a gut feel, right? Like I mentioned, there's so many aspects of the engineering field that just for whatever reason are exciting to me. And so I'm always paying attention to stories in the news, things that I see outside, and I just pay attention to what I'm paying attention to, right? Like if I ask myself, what the heck is that? I have to kind of trust my gut that other people would wonder the same question. And so a lot of it is just kind of a gut feel of, um, you know, if I'm wondering this, if I'm curious about this, there's got to be other people who are too, basically.
Okay, well, we can hang on for a few minutes while people drop off if anybody has a lingering question, but thank you, Grady, for talking to us, and we'll see the rest of you in lecture or recitation this week.
Yeah,
So,
thank you so much for having me. Thank you for all the nice questions.
Thank you.
so Grady, what do you do with all those models?
Oh my gosh. A lot of them just sit on a shelf.
You could probably donate them to schools.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is a lot of them are that they're really designed and built for kind of a one-time use
Oh, I
situation.
see. Yes.
They're not
I imagine your garage being full of these.
yeah. Well, a lot of things get reused. I have like bins and bins of parts, and if it can be taken apart, I'll take it apart and reuse it later. But
Yeah.
I do have a lot of stuff just sitting on shelves.
This is a pretty personal question. I'm just curious. Do you still pay attention to Aggie football or?
To Aggie football. No, I've never been much of a football fan, and coming into A&M as a grad student, honestly, was pretty disorienting to me because all the traditions and stuff like that, I didn't know or understand any of it. And like they for grad students, they have like this 1 hour seminar where they try to teach you all that stuff,
They
which
didn't
is
even
just
have
not
that
enough.
anymore when I started. It
Oh,
was just-
really?
I Googled a lot.
Yeah, exactly. I was having to
you in.
Google, what does this mean? So I mean, I hate to be a disappointment, but I mean, I consider myself an Aggie, but I don't know if I'm a true Aggie since I just went there for grad school.
Hey, you still got the ring, so. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed I actually watched your channel quite a bit. It's pretty
Oh,
cool.
cool.
It's one of the like cool few you and like CGP Grey a lot, like a lot of those, like just the random
Nice.
topics that are really interesting.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
You have a good day.
You too.
Alex, Cooper, anything from you?
Probably in the bathroom.
Yeah, I'm not sure they're still here. I felt I was the exact same way when I started grad school here.
Really?
Oh, just yeah, I came down from the Northeast and I was like, what?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because my parents went to school there, both of them. That's where they met. And
Oh,
they didn't like
must have known something.
they never talked about any of that stuff.
Yeah.
I remember coming to them and was like, did you do all this stuff? And they're like, oh yeah, we did that. It's
They
like
just didn't talk about it much.
just never mentioned any of the traditions or anything like that.
Yeah, it's a whole different culture.
It's very different.
Truly. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I'll see you in about 10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay.
Yeah. So the next one starts at 5:30. So
Okay, cool. I'm gonna
Yeah.
grab some water and I'll be back.
yeah, okay, cool.